I want to show people new music, and I want to be exposed to new music.
Stuff that we know as household names, as great as they are. Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, Donny Hathaway, give me that stuff all day. I love it. But that is like such a small slice of what was going on.
There's all these different indie labels that have reissue variants. The one common thread that I constantly see,
It literally comes down to like the proverbial put the headphones on and say like, listen to this.
I think in 20, 30 years when we're all drowning in AI generated everything, this old classic stuff, from the 60s and the 70s, I think we're going to be even more drawn to that.
one of the main reasons I collect pieces of vinyl is because I find it fascinating that there are so many artists out there, particularly from back in the day, that never got their due and their music has almost been lost to time. So finding it is something very special to me. And thankfully, there are record labels out there today that are reissuing these lost artists. And there are stories and real people who want to get their music to be heard. And in this video, we have both. Ben Takis, who's become a new friend in the vinyl community, recently brought back to life a legendary 7-inch 45 from Kip Carmen, an artist that's almost been lost to time, as we're going to see here, and one with a personal connection to Ben. And this was done in partnership with Continued Sound Records, which is a new reissue label getting some awesome vinyl out there from some of these lost artists. And their founder, Graham Wallace, is going to join me and Ben to talk about why getting rare records reissued is important, and also why you should definitely check out this Kip Carmen 7-inch. There will be links for all this stuff, Continued Sound Records, Kip Carmen's Bandcamp, and other stuff that comes up in the discussion in the description below. So if you're interested in checking any of that stuff out, please do, and subscribe to the channel while you're there to find out more stuff like this. But now let's talk with Graham and Ben about some awesome rare records. Thank you guys very much for coming over and hanging out. I feel like you're in my house at the moment. I'm pretty excited to talk to both of you about all of this stuff. Let's just get started here. Ben, welcome, and Graham, welcome.
This is, I could not be having more fun talking about rare records, and whether it's Kip stuff or just anything. Like, this is what I love to do, and Graham is the same way.
Yeah, it's a good old fashioned nerd out.
Real quick, let's start out with a little bit of history about each of you guys. Like, Ben, like, what's your history with like both with Kip and also with collecting vinyl in general?
Well, I'll start with vinyl. And, I have a memory of during my teenage years when I was going to hardcore punk shows, 7 inches and stuff was what we would buy and what people would put out. That was just the easiest way to get out music, in an indie way in the 90s. So I had a bunch of that. Didn't really think about it again until I started getting into Brazilian music, and then collecting some of the soul and funk and R&B stuff. But I got heavily into Brazilian music, as you know, Rocco and Graham. We've talked a lot about that. And that's where I really started my journey of like digging, first of all, to get to know the main artist. And I had a Brazilian band, and I got really super into it. But then learning from DJs around me who would go deeper and deeper. And you just find these things that were so obscure, but so amazing. So that's what kind of hooked me into that journey, starting like 20 years ago. As far as Kip, while I was growing up, Kip was having this whole career as an R&B musician and band leader. He came into my life, to date myself, it was around 1984, and I was 5 years old. When I say he came into my life and I was 5 years old, he met my mom, and they were together in a relationship till my mom passed in 2009. So 25 years or so.
Okay.
Technically, they never got married, but when somebody's in your life for that long.
Oh yeah, man.
Yeah.
I've same thing in my family, so very similar. Yeah. But that's awesome though. He's like, he's basically like a father figure to you and hanging out like, in that way.
And Kip was kind of on the tail end of his recording career, but leaning very heavily into having a band, making money and really well-paying gigs, still doing that every weekend, multiple times per week. And that's just kind of what I grew up with. And it was only later, after I went through my punk phase and my avant-garde jazz phase, that I circled back and started really getting into the stuff that Kip was doing and the stuff that Kip was showing me all those years, all the Otis Redding and Dr. John and that kind of stuff. Yeah, he got me into playing drums. He got me my first little, set of drums and pushed my mom to put me into lessons. and I was kind of around music. So that's where all this got started. When my mom passed in 2009, for some reason, to just kind of like, me and Kip kind of brought us closer in a way. That was the time that I put up a website for Kip. Had somebody make it, one of the cheesy websites in the late 2000s, put that up. And that was the first time his music was online in any way. And that's when he started hearing from people that would find him, people from Greece, England, all around the world. And that blew his mind because his recording career was kind of behind him for a bit. And the fact that someone could find these singles that he put out from, how did it get all the way to Europe? So he started hearing from those people, and he would share the messages with me. And some years went on, and eventually some people came around wanting to reissue the records. And that started around 2017, 2018, 2019. And a few of those came out, but we were always running into this issue where some of the best stuff was owned by this other guy who had financed the recordings. And I was just feeling the urge as Kip was getting older and a lot of the people involved with these recordings were getting older. I just knew that I wanted to make this happen and clear up the rights and really make it a mission to put this out in the right way and kind of do what I could to raise awareness about Kip's music.
Like kind of a great segue with that, like, Graham, what's your background, and can you tell us about your label and how you get involved with artists like this, to eventually meet?
I was also in the sort of punk rock skateboarding sphere in high school, but I gravitated way more to hip hop. I was a total punk kid, but they ran those crowds in the suburbs of Jersey were kind of one and the same. They'd go to the same shows. And if I was at a hip hop show, there'd just be punk kids, and there was definitely one big family. So, but what I think grew from the hip hop stuff is what I think naturally comes to a hip hop fan, which is like finding about samples and production and starting to track down. It's just sort of, these are all little doorways into new music and new artists. And, that's where the discovery came from. Being shown new music was something I sort of experienced at a very young age, and it just sort of carried on. And I think we probably all had that moment in our lives where we realized that there was other stuff out there than what was on the radio or what sort of the other kids from school were going to their whatever concert was out there. You just realized there was an entire other world of music to discover. And you kind of, once you get a taste of it, at least for me, it doesn't really go away. Around a couple of years, like 2 years ago, was finally dawned on me of like, oh, maybe a reissue label is not just this out of reach idea. Maybe just start looking around online, seeing if you can actually contact people. I think with punk rock and skateboarding and all those subcultures, there's a DIY sort of ethos around it. And you realize like, these are just people. You can maybe just email them or cold call them in my case and just start conversations. And sure enough, it kind of worked in my favor, especially being so like naive when I would just call a George Kerr or a Paul Kaiser, these producers in their 80s of Jersey-based like soul music. They realized they were talking to a pretty inexperienced, young dude just trying to make something, and they maybe saw themselves in me and were just like, yeah, let's make this together. I don't think this person doesn't have bad intentions, so let's get it going. And it's just been sort of a learning experience since then.
What year did Continued Sound start?
From 2020, 2021, 2022 was sort of the early stages. But as far as a label with stuff out, it's only been a year or 2 years now.
The Soul of New Jersey is the first thing that you put out, right?
Yeah.
And so I found out about that from Nadine, and it's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Which I think is really cool that you are putting out a compilation of New Jersey soul records. I live in like the Philadelphia area, so I'm not far from New Jersey. I'm very familiar with Jersey. And yet I find out about it from Nadine in Germany. but that's super cool though. And then I got it. That was awesome. So you've been working on putting that compilation together for like 3-4 years. It sounds like you were saying.
Yeah, it was a lot of, especially when you're just some guy at the beginning, because I didn't really know when you're to form a label, you it might be easier when you have a contemporary sort of band and you know them and they're making music and then you go put that out. But I was sort of, hunting down rare tracks and then sort of bouncing it off see if I can contact George or Paul or any producer that's attached to them. It's a long journey of like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And especially, and along that journey, I was establishing myself like I should probably be more legit in my presentation and probably get an LLC, get a company going to sort of bolster that, this wild idea I have. So yeah, it was a long time coming. And that's sort of been the MO for reissuing something. It's a lot of back and forth until it's kind of go time.
I've only experienced it very briefly with a couple people in my life of like other people who have actually tried to reissue, records that have rights and things like that. And you quickly learn why the music industry is so complicated, and you quickly learn why, there's just so much misconception from the customer's level to like the creation of these records. So hopefully today we'll try to talk a little bit about some of that and kind of like clear it up. One thing that has been very evident to me that seems to be like a common thread through all of these labels. I'm a big fan of like Coal Mine. They have like a Remind sub label. Daptone has Eversoul. There's all these different indie labels that have like reissue variants. And then there's ones like Numero, or Mr. Bongo and stuff like that all release like, super, super rare stuff. The one common thread that I constantly see, in the day that the music industry was as big as it was, it really was just churning out artists like a machine and running people through that machine just like that. Like literally, if you were like French fries being pushed through a grinder. And so let's talk a little bit about Kip and like the misrepresentation, because I feel like the misrepresentation is what happens so much with a lot of these artists, but it's also in a weird sick way. It's cool that nowadays we're kind of I feel like Kip has a better audience now than he would have 50 years ago, but like talk a little bit about some of that.
It helps to know Kip was the kind of guy when he was a teenager, he was the guy who was putting on shows in his hometown. He'd figure out how to rent the venue. And I'm talking in the mid 60s, put up flyers everywhere, just like punk shows and we would do in the 90s. And he would sell it out, because he was putting on a really good show even back then. And he would just do it again and again. And to the point where people were like, oh, there's money to be made here. And they kind of like, okay, get out of the way, kid. And then he wasn't able to do it as much. So he kind of comes from that spirit. So he racked up a lot of experience. But then when he started getting a brush with the industry, he had a record with this label called Musicor Records that had some hit songs. They were kind of a prominent label. And he bounced around a little bit, eventually ended up at High Records. But kind of what he learned through that process is, they're just going to figure out a way to make you into a commodity and just throw it out there, see what sticks, move on to the next thing. And he experienced a lot of that. And you talked about misrepresentation. His first record from Musicor, they wouldn't let him put his name. They made him call himself Kip Carson. And like, what is that about? What does that even do? So
and it's so common with so many artists back then. I feel like there's when you hear a lot of these stories, there's so much assumption. We assume that Kip Carmen is not a good name, so we're going to make you Kip Carson because we assume that that's just going to make better things. I mean, it's all assumption.
It goes through this marketing brain, which it might work, it might not. They don't really care much that these are people with lives and careers. They're just going to do what they do. And if it makes money, great. They're the ones who profit. And if it doesn't, on to the next thing.
Because it was big business back then. It's not like it is nowadays where the music industry is like almost dead almost. But it was huge mega business. So it was like, if you're not just selling number one records, you're nobody. You know what I mean? Like, and we're not even going to waste our time with you, which really is why we have like these treasure troves of millions of 45s and 12 inches and LPs out there of artists, because
Yeah.
it was like, if you're not a number one hit, you're nothing. And it's like, well, no, there's like 500 different levels of awesomeness out there. So
But that's part of the reason why this endeavor of getting rare records out there is important. Because really, the stuff that we know as household names, as great as they are, I mean, Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, Donny Hathaway, give me that stuff all day. I love it. But that is like such a small slice of what was going on. And even take Al Green. Al Green's amazing. And he was like the main workhorse at High Records. But I think it adds to the story and the context of what was going on when you know that High Records also had this lineup of people that it was trying, and it had a subsidiary label that Kip recorded on called Mock Records. And while Al Green was bringing in the money, they were kind of working with their other artists, Syl Johnson, Ovi Wright, and then people like Kip, who they were just trying out. And I think it adds context. You know, there's more than just the big names that we know. There's also, they were doing unusual stuff with other artists. And I think that just makes it more interesting.
I agree. And it's mostly what is filling our record shelves nowadays. Like, it's all the stuff that we want to look for. It's like, hey, Al Green's cool, but we've heard all of his records and I want to hear, you know, his drummer's record, you know what I mean? And things like that.
yeah.
Real quick, just with the Al Green stuff or with the High Record stuff. So was he you said he was a guitar session guy for them, or was he trying to be a featured artist?
Oh, no. Kip was brought on as a featured artist, but he put out, if you can see this record, the A side is called Makin' Woman Blues on a High Record subsidiary. And he was under contract with High Records, and he recorded stuff there at Royal Studios. But interestingly, it leads to some of those tapes being given back to Kip, and then Kip recording some other stuff, and then putting that together and releasing his own album, which Rocco, you got. Yeah. So this includes. Oh, I got it. Kip has a few of these sealed, and this is one that was sealed. So on this record, it's stuff from Royal Studios in Memphis, stuff with other session musicians like Cornell Dupree, who is Aretha Franklin's and Donny Hathaway's guitarist, Jerry Jamot on bass, who again with Aretha Franklin, just a monster, Chris Parker on drums, and just a whole bunch of stuff. And it's quite amazing that Kip had the ability and the entrepreneurship to just, even in 1980, eventually put this out on something he just created himself. He got it pressed. He got the cover made, all of that. So, and we've not even gotten to the recording that Graham and I just put out, but just to give you a sense of what Kip did do in his career.
And that's what's amazing is like these people can have this entire career and no one's ever heard of them. And I'm sure that like Graham, you probably have some troves of these types of things or some other stories and things like that of artists. But what led you to Ben, or what led Ben to you to want to get Kip onto Continued Sound?
I think it started from, again, it's our friend Nadine, she cannot be credited enough. Because, you know, true to your point, I put out this compilation with not just no idea what I'm doing on the record front, but no like contacts, and I don't know what networks to go through to sort of promote this thing. So she found it on her own. She wanted to, she asked for a copy. I said, absolutely. She checked down, she made a show on it. And then, you know, again, I'm still just like, oh, this German woman has a YouTube show. That's pretty cool. That's something. Before or after recording, we're still just talking, and she mentions that Ben came on and had shared some Brazilian and Latin records, and so they have a friendship. And she's like, and he's been looking for a home for his stepdad's music, so that could be. And granted, I've heard that before. People that might go like, oh, I've heard of this old music that never heard. Like, so I've heard sort of people recommending me. Finally started exchanging emails, and then when I actually heard it, it was like, that's been the coolest thing and the binding factor in our relationship. But also the record is like, I know you're hearing a lot of yada yada yada, but like, listen to this song and things will go smoothly from there. You'll want to get on board. I've been reaching out just to promote this thing, and it literally comes down to like the proverbial put the headphones on and say like, listen to this. And I got it. And I was like, oh, the strength of this, even if it's this single that we test the waters with, I think it's going to be infectious, and it's going to really put his name out there.
I love the B-side of it. I think the B-side's really great. Like I most of the time get attracted to B-side, and especially nowadays. It's funny, I was talking to another friend of mine, Max Ochester, about this, and he was saying how like he used to really be into the A-sides of like the upbeat, funky things, and that's where I was too. But lately I've been really more onto the B-sides that are like a little bit slower. This one's not so much a ballad, but I do like the chillness of the B-side of this one like a lot. It's just I've listened to it like way more than the A-side.
That one was the infectious one with me. I know. I mean, a lot of people have said that's enough for me because it does have that punch and it comes in swinging and it grabs your attention. But I think just by luck of the draw, Ben might have sent me 2 songs and I just clicked one, and the very laid back, chill groove of Lovin' in the Morning. I'm like, I'm already transported. It has like a soundtrack effect. It's just like you're there and you're in the mood.
It's funny. You guys might be onto something, because I think technically it wasn't really clear, but I think Lovin' in the Morning might have been originally the A-side, and we kind of flipped it just because that's enough for. I have the original. It doesn't say A or B, believe it or not. It has. So a little trivia. You find these labels that just come in and they go out of business, and it was that kind of time where people who had no business like being in music would just come into the music industry and then leave. And you have all these random labels, and Queen Bee is one of those. So I could only find like a couple records out there. So there's no A and B side. There is a catalog number. It says QB1315 on the Lovin' in the Morning and QB1316 on That's Enough for Me. So, but my thinking was, Graham and I were talking about, well, what would be good to put out? And this is one that I knew would just grab people, and kind of leading with the rocker, the more loud, rambunctious one kind of made a little more sense in the day we're in. But that hook and that groove, which is really kind of more true to Kip's R&B roots, is a great one. And I'm not surprised that one, that's one that grabs people.
I think it's way smart to go with the psych rock version on the A side first, because a lot of people have been really into like the fraction stuff, all that stuff that Noble Records is reissuing with his like all that rare psych stuff. Everybody's like super into that, and so that A side falls right into that. Graham, when you go to put out these reissues, do you personally have do you want to use original labels? Do you try to go back and put together as much of the original product as you can?
I try to. It definitely my job is my day job is a graphic designer. So, and I can preserve an old thing. Like I could retouch. That's sort of that's my sweet spot. It's my wheelhouse. So that's already a fun job to make for myself. Anyway, I definitely enjoy a reissue when I'm purchasing one to be, if there is original artwork and original aspects to it, to be the best. I don't want a new product. I want something to feel like as close to holding it in your hand as possible. I remember hearing an interview with the guys at Mr. Bongo, and they said when they first got started, even repressing the most obscure Brazilian albums of all time, their fan base would be like, hey, that particular logo wasn't in the original. Like, it's a point of pride for someone who has the original to know what's on the original. So if they're your audience, you might want to placate them as best you can. So, and I really enjoy taking a label and just modern, not just scanning it in with all the warts and all and sending it out to be reprinted. I want to like bring it back through and clean it up. And if I'm doing a compilation and I get to make my own artwork, such as with Soul of New Jersey, I want it to have its own sort of look and feel. And that's so much fun. And that's part of the job that I enjoy. What I want to include always, I've been talking about this nonstop, is just the insert or the booklet is just so special to me. And whenever a reissue comp or anything just has like the bigger the booklet, the better. I was actually on Nadine's show the other day, pulled out this Analog Africa reissue. It's this, not only a gatefold, but it's got like a novella on the inside that's just full color. Like it's got everyone's bio in it. I'm like, it's game recognized games. They say the attention to detail is like unreal. I'm like, this is aspirational. So I love an homage to and a doing justice to the original, but also like, hey, here's what we do as reissuers. We want you to know that here's the work that went into it. Here's a little making of, and yeah, all those little details are great.
And what I love about this release is how often with a 7-inch do you get like a cover and a jacket that, is as nice as a lot of LP 12-inch jackets. I love what Graham did. We went through photos and Graham was like, I'm thinking this like close up photo. I was like, okay, that's amazing.
You did all the layout for the insert there?
Yeah, the insert and the cover. I think, Ben sent me probably 100 photos, and just skimming through those, I didn't know if it was going to be something graphic, some sort of, real manipulation. But then I just saw that photo of like a young man in the music industry with all the hope and future ahead of him. I'm like, this captures me more than any piece of art. Let's just put that front and center and kind of put our little accreditation on the side. But this is the cover.
And I put a lot of thought into the liner notes that I got to write, just because when you're picking up something by an artist you've not heard of, you need some context. Where did Kip come from? Placing him in Memphis, about to go to High Records in about a year, and working with this very well-regarded producer, Bob Morgan, who worked with Marcus Valley and other well-known people. So you kind of got this young artist at this intersection in his career, was about to go on and do, bigger things. But at this one moment in time, you kind of, all that energy came together. And you don't really know that unless somebody gives you that context and gives you that history. So I thought that was really cool. A 7-inch with a jacket and liner notes and photos and things like that.
Speaking of Mr. Bongo, I saw the Kip Carmen record on Mr. Bongo's website when I was shopping the other day. So that's super awesome. So if you want to get it from Mr. Bongo, you can. This is something that I've been learning as a vinyl collector now for 20 years. You're now creating a new thing that 20 years from now is going to be rare. Like that, those 200 copies of this Kip Carmen record 20 years from now, you're not going to be pressing them again. You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean, and that's part of the coolness of it, but that's what's great about like, get on it now when it's, $8 or $10, cause it's going to go up and that'll be cool. But I mean, it's also a cool thing cause you guys are like adding to the lexicon.
When I was putting together this, I'm mirrored, so I'm trying to do it. This comp, there's a band on there called Pride, and only on their 45s it says the band's name is Pride. The band's name is Pride of the Ghetto, and they shortened it to Pride because Pride of the Ghetto was not, an acceptable name, or it wasn't commercial enough. So on all their research, and you don't hear Pride of the Ghetto anywhere. It was never in print anywhere. But then I bounced it off of Paul. I was like, "Is the band's name Pride of the Ghetto?" And he goes, "It was. That was their name." But then whoever wanted to put it out was like, "You're just called Pride." So I made sure to call them Pride of the Ghetto on my compilation because that's who they were.
So real quick, Graham, you said before are you from New Jersey?
Yes. No, I'm from a tiny suburb called Madison. It's northern central. About 40-minute train ride to the city. We're right on NJ Transit.
When you were compiling the New Jersey thing, do you own all of the 45s that go into that compilation?
Oh, yes, definitely. And luckily they were not super unaffordable. I think some were a little out of reach. Well, it's a fun story of how I got these guys' phone numbers. There's a group, this sort of neo-soul group out of Jersey called the Jack Moves, and they make cool stuff. And I was sort of, through friends of friends, connected with them. And I just cold DM'd those dudes because I saw in an interview that they had mentioned these George Kerr and Paul Kaiser had helped them produce their record because they were just classic soul Jersey dudes. And they were like, "Yeah, I was hoping for an email." They're like, "No, here's their phone numbers. Here's their landline phone numbers." So I called these men out of the blue, just being like, "You don't know me and I'm not anything, but like, hear me out for 2 seconds." And so that's how I got going. And I was just dropping, bands like Pride of the Ghetto on these guys. And they're like, "I haven't thought about them." I was one of the songs, Soul Walkin' from the Whatnots that I put on my record, George Kerr forgot he made. So he was like, I got to get on that. I got to get on BMI. I got to like figure out how to make money on that. Like yeah, I alerted him to that one.
And so you compiled that mostly from needle drops?
I got needle drops and I sent it to this guy in the Hudson Valley. His name is Alan Dochis. And I later learned, I don't know if it's Duchess or Dochis, but then I learned when I started working with other mastering guys, they hold him in high regard. I didn't know who I was dealing with, but he's like a mastering guru from back in the day. And he's been a sort of a Jersey guy. He's produced, I forget, but if you look up Alan Dochis on Discogs, he's done like huge bands. So I knew I was in good hands.
I mean, I'm curious about some of the nuts and bolts process about the, making a needle drop or even like going about, this kind of thing, because the Kip Carmen record is a needle drop as well, right?
It is. And I would love if there were master tapes. And with Kip stuff, I have some stuff on master tapes, half inch or quarter inch reel, that's what you want. I've got some sources that we could only get from a cassette tape that was recorded from the board in the studio, professionally made. And that's like the best source we have. And then there's other stuff, which 1973 studio that has long since gone out of business, labels long since gone out of business. There is no master tape. So it's like, if you want to hear this and not spend $200, what we're bringing you is we put it together from a really clean copy. We've got amazing mastering engineers, and what they do is incredible. And we can give you a presentation that I have both, and it is right up there. It's a really great sounding record. And the thing, I love a AAA all analog, pristine recording reproduced onto a record, Kevin Gray mastered. I love that stuff. But it's really realistically only a very small slice of music that is available and even conducive to that format. So it's really about once you get beyond that cream of the crop, top tier studio production, vaults, temperature controlled, all of those ingredients, then you're just, if you want to explore further, a lot of times needle drops are what you have. And I think it's got a bad name from some of the stuff people would do, years ago, where you just throw it out, you make a master from a CD. What we've got and what we're working with now is way levels above that. Like the mastering engineer we used is amazing. His name's Dave Gardner. He's currently remastering all of the Westbound Records, Funkadelic stuff for org music. And a guy like that, who is top of the game, he put Kip's original record, I sent it to him, put it through a ultrasonic machine, brought out like what needed to be brought out, cleaned up all the ticks and pops, that were left. And what they can do, you're not getting just a half-ass job. You're getting really quality work.
I can say this. I mean, listening to this 45 on both the black version and the color version, it never stuck out to me in any second like I was like, oh, this is a bad copy.
As someone, a maker of records, it's not my personal affinity and journey of like, I'm not an audiophile guy. I want to show people new music and I want to be exposed to new music. Yeah, it's sort of the music comes first. Work your hardest on something and then you hope the person getting it is experiencing it and taking it at that value of like, this is someone's hard work that went into this, both the music and the curation.
And that's what has drawn to me to this whole thing is Ben's hard work on this, is the idea that like, I mean, I was already touched at the idea that, he wanted to get his stepdad's, music out there again, and also just as somebody who wants to get somebody else's music out there again, you know what I mean? That's just super cool.
This is just the beginning of this journey. And I'm so happy with this product. Graham and I, we might circle back and have another release later, but getting this single out, which is one of Kip's strongest things that collectors are really into, he's got other material. He's got maybe 2 full albums and like a good size compilations worth. But that is kind of where I'm going from here, is getting this other stuff of Kip's out and then kind of building to this album that I want to see it released and get the due that it should have got in the early 80s. He never wanted to be put in any kind of box. he had producers tell him like, why don't you try singing like Stevie Wonder? And he's like, why would I do that? You've got Stevie Wonder. I'm trying to do what I do. And he just didn't care about genre. And as a result, it's part of his story of not getting bigger than he got, but creating great music and working with amazing musicians, is he just kind of did what he was feeling. And it just, the timing being what it was, it never was like the hit thing. He was always like a few years behind or a few years ahead. And that's kind of where this stuff remains obscure, but certainly the quality, it doesn't have to be obscure. And to your point, Rocco, I think now this is where music like this, if it was being now, it would find an audience. You don't need to be in a box as much these days.
What's cool about Kip's story is that it's a story of integrity. It's a story about, having pride in what you sound like and not doing what, he had opportunities to sell his soul, as it were, and he could have just made one kind of music. There were so many decisions that he could have made to be more commercially viable that would have just not been in line with his beliefs. So it's so cool to be like, no, he didn't. That's where you can, again, identify when you read about something like that. You're like, this is a true musician spirit.
I think it's exciting that you guys are doing this, and I think it's exciting that there's even, an avenue for this stuff. Like, if people wanted to bring Continued Sound more records, how would they go about that?
Well, it hasn't been. It's still very much, I'm on the offensive. I would welcome anyone who said, hey, I know a guy who knows a guy who's related to a guy who's got some stuff you want to hear. They can get a hold of me through my website or just, DM. It's a slow process. It's a sort of a one-man show. If anyone's going to slide my DMs and say, there's some music you got to hear, our ears are always open.
As a musician, if I had my own record, that would be successful enough for me. So whether or not it's sold, I wouldn't even care. But what's your measure of success on this?
Well, I would love if people kind of put Kip in the category of one of these obscure artists who did really great stuff and is in that conversation, like Rodriguez, Sugarman, Waiting for Sugarman, like that level of thing. So what I'm working on is I've got some friends in the hip hop community trying to get some of this stuff out for remixing and sampling, trying to get Kip's name out there in the sync licensing, film, TV space. And I've got some connections and some relatives there as well. So I want to give it kind of life in all these different spaces, as well as the vinyl community, which is where I feel most at home. So that's when I'm working all those angles, trying to build this up. And this is the starting point. The next release maybe lands a little different. And then ultimately, when we get to the unreleased album, we'll see where that lands when the time is right.
And Rocco, I love what you said about when you're putting something out, it's new to you and you know how the sausage is made, but it's going to last for another, till the end of time, another 30 years. Like, it's just, you're making something that people hold in their hands and will continue to, as will discovering something like Kip Carmen's music, where we recognize it as this unearthed gem from the 70s that, didn't have a life before then or whatever. But in 30 years, 40 years, if it's just becomes in the zeitgeist and in the what's the pantheon of sort of soul music from the 70s, someone 30 years from now isn't going to know when it was discovered. It's just part of the building and the fabric of that music, which is so cool because you're bringing it in, you're almost sending it into a stream, and the stream just carries with all the other music. And, someone won't be able to distinguish, generations from now, what Curtis Mayfield, Kip Carmen, these are all just musicians from the 70s that made awesome stuff from this period.
I think in 20, 30 years, when we're all drowning in AI generated everything, this old classic stuff, from the 60s and the 70s, I think we're going to be even more drawn to that, and all of it's going to be around, and that's going to feel like home for a lot of us.
I mean, that's kind of why I already draw myself to it to begin with. I think I'm subconsciously trying to put my kids in like an analog world. With Continued Sound, are there any other artists or any other things on the horizon?
The next in line is this album that I can't imagine a lot of people know about. It's called The Shadow by a guy called OGG. And I first discovered one of the songs on a compilation. It was this of AOR, kind of international AOR. and I'd heard this crazy song called The Shadow by a group that I thought at the time by OGG, and bought this record on Discogs for like $60, got it from Jamaica. And I was like, what is this album? What's going on? And then in my research, found out he's Canadian. He lives in Toronto. He moved there when he was young from Jamaica, but he was making this music. He was in a group called Crack of Dawn that was the very first Black band in Canada to get signed to a major label, genre defining, like doesn't matter. And he went solo out of this Crack of Dawn funk band and made 2 records under his nickname OGG that are just a blend. He then went on to be a reggae musician and have a lot of success with a reggae band, but this is in between funk and reggae. He put out 2 records that are just this fusion-y, jazzy madness, sort of like island jazz funk that I couldn't believe he answered my email back, and we got to talking, and he was just the coolest guy, like very comfortable in his music place. Like he's got recognition, and he's just enough to be like, oh, you want to put out that record? Like, let's do it. Let's see what happens. And I'm like, holy crap, this is going to be cool. So yeah.
When do you have a date or on the horizon, or?
It's being pressed as we speak. So
it sweet. Can be, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
So sometime this year.
So sometime this year for sure. I probably in the fall or something, but yeah, more
excited. I'll go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be on streaming pretty soon, and I can, have that. Like it's all on me to get it out there and get people sort of listening to it. I think there's some evidence of it on YouTube that you can listen to, but it's really, really awesome.
Do you have any kind of umbrella or parameter that you're going for with Continued Sound, or is it just anything that you can get your hands on?
It's funny because you do have to sort of carve out a niche for yourself. I think what's always been my niche as a human being, when my interests have been in the soul, funk, jazz, sort of hip hop, the grandfather of hip hop sort of sphere. Label, you do have to sort of define yourself of who wants to distribute your stuff, who should you be marketed to. Like it helps that this is my sort of my interest, and it's what I gravitate towards. And so, yeah, I think it'll always sort of be if it could be sampled by hip hop or just be considered sort of a relative, a grandfather of the hip hop world, be it soul, funk, or jazz, or even reggae, or any sort of R&B is sort of my sweet spot.
Basically anything that I would talk about on Pieces of Vinyl would be.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's awesome. No, but that's cool. I mean, like that's what I love that, man. I mean, like, I think that's, you kind of hit it the right way. Like anything that would be sampled by hip hop is a great way to kind of like put it out there. Great meeting you, Graham.
Yeah.
And Ben, good seeing you again. I really want to thank Graham Wallace and Ben Takis for coming on to share this project with you. And I also want to thank Kip Carmen for making such awesome music and always staying true to who you are. Authenticity always perseveres. So I hope that more people find your music. Like I mentioned before, if you want to get this record, find out more about Kip Carmen or Continued Sound Records, links for all of this stuff are in the description below. You will definitely enjoy this record. And like I mentioned, when these types of reissues come out, you need to jump on them. First off, there are a lot of people, real people, that you're helping out when you support these small labels and obscure artists and things like that. But as a collector, it equals this will become a rare item in and of itself someday. They only pressed 200 copies of this. So I have tons of records that I got exclusives on just thinking that I was supporting a cool new artist or label, and then 10 or 15 years later, they're worth 10 times more than what I paid for them. So keep an open mind and check out some awesome new old releases. Now, if you like this video, the algorithm's going to tell you that you should watch this video next. But if you want to choose from one of these other ones, just definitely go watch one of them, and I'll see you on the next one.
Sugar in my coffee, jelly on my toast.